The promise at 37,000 feet. The Seattle-Tacoma International Airport was still half asleep at 4 in the morning. The kind of stillness only travelers know. The kind where the fluorescent lights hum a little too loud, where the rolling wheels of luggage echo down empty corridors, where the announcements over the PA system feel less like information and more like distant voices in a dream you cannot quite remember when you wake up. Daniel Whitaker walked through the jet bridge with his head down and his shoulders carrying the weight of a man who had stopped expecting much from mornings. He was 42 years old, 6 feet tall, broad through the chest and shoulders in a way that made strangers step aside without thinking about it. His leather jacket was scuffed at the elbows from years of riding. The patch on the back read, "Iron Saints, MC, Portland Chapter." His hands were calloused. A heavy silver ring sat on his right middle finger, etched with a winged skull. Tattoos crawled out from beneath the cuffs of his sleeves, dark ink on weathered skin, the kind of marks that told stories he no longer felt the need to explain. He looked to anyone glancing his way like exactly the sort of man you would not want to sit next to on a long international flight. He had stopped caring about that years ago. It had taken him a long time to stop caring. There had been a year right after he separated from the service when he had still tried. He had still combed his hair the way the Air Force had taught him to comb it. He had still worn collared shirts to the grocery store. He had still smiled at strangers in elevators and tried to make himself small enough to fit through a world that did not want him anymore. And it had not worked. The world looked at him the way the world looked at all veterans who came home and tried to disappear back into a country that had moved on without them. The world looked at him politely, which was almost worse than not looking at him at all. Then he had bought the first Harley. He had bought it from a man named Ray in Tigard, an old veteran who was selling it because his arthritis had finally won the argument. Ray had taken Daniel out to the back of the lot and had said only one thing. "Son, this thing will save your life, or it will kill you." Sometimes both. Daniel had handed him the cash and ridden it home. And that night, sitting in his garage with the engine ticking as it cooled, Daniel had understood for the first time in a year that he was not actually trying to disappear. He was trying to remember he was alive. The Iron Saints had found him a year after that, or maybe he had found them. The line was not always clear. He had stopped trying to fit. He had stopped combing his hair. He had stopped smiling at strangers. And somewhere in there, the world had stopped looking at him politely and had started looking at him with caution, and the caution was the most honest reaction he had ever gotten from civilians, and he had decided he could live with that. Daniel boarded Atlantic Air Flight 447 to Reykjavik with nothing but a single carry-on bag slung over his shoulder. He did not look at the flight attendants. He did not smile at the gate agent. He simply nodded once and kept moving the way a man moves when he has done something 1,000 times before and stopped pretending it was special. Seat 8, A, window. Always the window. He had learned long ago that windows were small private kingdoms, a wall of glass between you and the world, a place where you could lean your head and pretend for a few hours at 37,000 feet that you owed nothing to anyone. Daniel slid into the seat, tucked his bag under the row in front of him, and folded his leather jacket against the cold curve of the fuselage to use as a pillow. The cabin was filling slowly. Soft yellow lighting. The hush of overhead bins clicking closed. The murmur of strangers who would never know each other's names. He pulled his phone from his pocket, and the screen lit his face in the dim light. The lock screen photo showed a girl with 2 missing front teeth and a streak of flour on her cheek, holding up a pancake the size of a dinner plate. His daughter, Lily. 9 years old, going on 25, with eyes that missed nothing and a laugh that could crack a stone in half. A message sat at the top of his screen from his sister Sarah. Lily is asleep. She made me promise we would have blueberry pancakes ready for Saturday morning. Don't be late. She has already drawn the menu. Daniel's mouth pulled into something that was almost a smile. He typed back, "Boarding now. Home by noon Saturday. Tell her I'm bringing the good syrup." The reply came almost instantly, his sister still up at 4 in the morning, the way she always was when he was traveling. She has a list of 17 toppings. 17 Danny. Where did this child come from? He stared at the screen for a long moment. The little blinking cursor, the picture of his girl. Then he locked the phone and slid it into his jacket pocket and let his head fall back against the wall of the plane. That was when she sat down. He felt her before he saw her. A presence settling into the middle seat, 8B, with the practiced economy of a woman who had flown this route too many times to be impressed by it. She was in her mid-50s, sharp gray suit, pearl earrings, neck pillow looped over her arm like a piece of luggage that had earned its place. Her hair was cut short and silver and immaculate. Her perfume was expensive and faint. Margaret Holloway took one look at the man in seat 8A and made a decision. She did not announce it. She did not need to. The decision lived in the way her eyes flicked from the leather jacket to the tattoos to the heavy silver ring, and then snapped forward again, fixed on the seat back in front of her. The decision lived in the way she lifted her designer handbag off her lap and set it carefully on the empty aisle seat beside her, 8C, claiming the space the way a flag claims a hill. The decision lived in the small, almost imperceptible way she leaned her shoulder a 1/4 inch away from the armrest they were supposed to share. Daniel saw all of it. He had been seeing it for 6 years. He did not adjust himself. He did not soften his face or pull his sleeves down to hide the ink or offer her the polite smile he had learned to perform when he was younger and still cared what the world thought of him. He simply closed his eyes and let her have her quiet little judgment, the way you let a stranger have the last seat on the bus. He had bigger things to think about than what Margaret Holloway thought of his jacket. He had a daughter waiting in a kitchen in Portland with a list of 17 pancake toppings and a heart that still believed her father always came home. The cabin filled the rest of the way. Overhead bins clicked shut one by one. Flight attendants moved through the aisles with that particular brand of cheerful efficiency that suggested they had done this so many times the script had stopped meaning anything to them. The safety briefing began. Daniel did not watch. He had memorized every emergency exit on every commercial airframe in service before he was 23 years old. Some things, once you learn them, never leave you. He let his eyes stay closed and felt the plane begin to push back from the gate. The takeoff was smooth. the kind of takeoff Daniel had never been able to perform himself even in his best years. Commercial pilots flew in arcs and curves that respected passenger comfort. Fighter pilots flew in straight lines that respected nothing. He felt the rumble of the engines through the floor and the slow lift as the wheels left the runway, and the angle of the climb settling into its long, shallow arc out over Puget Sound. And then the cabin lights dimmed for the long flight east, and Daniel Whitaker, who had not slept properly in 3 nights, fell into a sleep so deep it felt like falling. He dreamed of his kitchen. He dreamed of Saturday morning sun coming through the blinds in long yellow stripes across the linoleum floor. He dreamed of the smell of butter on the griddle and the sound of Lily standing on her wobbly little step stool too close to the stove, insisting in her serious 9-year-old voice that she could pour the blueberries herself. He dreamed of her hair the same color his had been when he was a boy, falling into her eyes as she leaned over the bowl. He dreamed of her laugh. It was a good dream, the kind the mind reaches for when the body finally stops bracing itself. He had earned dreams like this. It had not always been like this. There was a time 6 years ago when Daniel Whitaker had a different name on his shoulder. Captain Whitaker, United States Air Force, F-16 Fighting Falcon, 1,200 hours in the cockpit, 3 combat deployments to the Middle East, 2 commendations for valor pinned to a uniform he wore the way most men wear their own skin. There was a time when his hands shook only when other people's lives depended on them being steady. There was a time when the sky was not a place he flew to. It was a place he came from. Then his wife left. It happened in the way these things happen. No warning, no fight. He came home from a 14-day rotation and found half the closet empty and a note on the kitchen table written in handwriting he had loved for 8 years. "I cannot do this anymore." The note did not say where she had gone. The note did not say if she was coming back. The note did not say anything about Lily, who was 2 years old asleep in her crib in the next room, breathing softly and unaware that her mother had just walked out of her life forever. Daniel had read the note 3 times. Then he had folded it. Then he had walked into Lily's room and stood by her crib and watched her sleep until the sun came up. He never heard from his wife again. 6 months later, the orders came through. Another deployment. He had kissed his daughter on her forehead and whispered into her hair that he would be back soon, even though she was too young to understand what soon meant. He had handed her over to his sister Sarah, who lived an hour outside Portland with a husband who was kind and patient and did not flinch when a man asked for help. And then Captain Whitaker had gone back to the only thing he was undeniably good at. He flew. He flew over deserts and mountains and oceans. He watched his daughter's life unfold in photographs sent across time zones. Her first day of preschool, taken from a phone his sister had not yet learned how to hold steady. Her first lost tooth, blurry the gap, impossibly small. Her 4th birthday, a cake with too many candles, and a little girl staring at the camera with eyes that looked just slightly confused, the way a child looks when she is trying to remember something she is not quite sure happened. When he came home from that deployment, Lily was 4 years old. She was standing in the hallway of his sister's house, holding a stuffed rabbit by one ear, and when Daniel walked through the door in his service uniform with his duffel bag over his shoulder, she looked at him for a long, long moment, and then she turned to her aunt and asked in the small, clear voice of a child trying to be polite, "Who is this man?" Daniel had set the duffel bag down very carefully on the hardwood floor. He had walked into the kitchen, and he had stood with his hands flat on the counter, and he had not cried because Captain Whitaker did not cry, but he had felt something inside him crack so quietly that no one else heard it. That night, after Lily had fallen asleep in his arms for the first time in 9 months, after she had finally remembered that the man with the deep voice and the rough hands was the same man whose photograph she kissed every night before bed, Daniel had carried her to her bed and tucked her in and sat on the floor beside her until the sun came up. The next morning, he had submitted his separation papers. He had folded his flight suit into a cardboard box and slid it onto the top shelf of his closet. He had hung up his captain's bars next to a photograph of his daughter. He had walked away from the only career he had ever wanted and the only thing he had ever been undeniably great at, and he had done it without hesitation because his daughter had asked who he was, and he had not had a good enough answer. He had promised her that first morning home in the soft voice fathers use only when no one else is listening. "I will always come home, sweetheart. That is a promise." She had wrapped her arms around his neck, and she had believed him the way only a 4-year-old can believe. For 5 years he had kept that promise. He had needed something to fill the space where the cockpit used to be. A man like Daniel Whitaker did not transition gently into civilian life. The discipline, the brotherhood, the sense of standing between people and the things that wanted to hurt them. None of that just disappeared because you took the patches off your sleeve. He had found the Iron Saints 6 months after his discharge. Most people heard the words motorcycle club, and they thought of the headlines. They thought of men with shaved heads and prison tattoos, and the kind of trouble that ended on the evening news. Daniel had thought those things too once. Then he had met them. A chapter outside Portland, run by a man named Big Tom, who had served 20 years in the Marines and lost a son to a drunk driver. A brotherhood of men who showed up. Men who answered the phone at 3 in the morning. Men who understood that some kinds of trouble could not wait for the police. The Iron Saints did work that did not make the news. They escorted women out of homes where the locks had been changed by men who refused to accept the word no. They sat in courtrooms during custody hearings so that scared mothers had someone in the back row when the judge looked up. They patrolled the streets where children walked home from school in neighborhoods the patrol cars had stopped visiting. They were not angels. Daniel would never have claimed that. But they were the closest thing to angels some people would ever meet. There had been the night last spring, for instance, when Daniel had answered his phone at 1 in the morning and driven 78 miles in the rain to a small house outside Eugene, where a woman named Rebecca was barricaded in her bathroom with her 2 children, while her ex-husband, who had a restraining order he had violated 4 times, already kicked at the door. The police were 30 minutes away. Daniel had been 22. He had not used his fists. He had not needed to. He had stood on the front porch in his leather jacket and his Iron Saints patch, and he had simply waited. And when the ex-husband came out of the house with the look of a man who had been doing math, Daniel had said only one thing very quietly, and the ex-husband had gone home and never come back. Daniel had walked Rebecca and her kids out to his truck. He had driven them to a friend's house. He had sat in the kitchen with Rebecca while she drank a cup of tea and stopped shaking. Then he had driven home and tucked Lily back into bed and slept for 3 hours and gotten up to make pancakes. That was the work. That was who he was now. He rode with them on weekends. He took the calls when they came. He used the skills the Air Force had given him in ways the Air Force would never have approved of, and he slept better at night because of it. But he did not fly. He had promised his daughter he would not fly. And the Iron Saints were not the sky. The Iron Saints were the road, and the road brought him home every night. He came home every night. For 5 years, without a single exception, Daniel Whitaker came home. The cabin lights flickered once. It was so brief that most of the passengers did not notice. A pulse of darkness gone almost before it registered. Then the soft yellow light returned, and the engines hummed on, and the airplane continued its long, quiet arc across the dark Atlantic toward Iceland. Daniel did not wake. He was deep in his kitchen dream now. Lily had flour on her nose. She was laughing at something he had said. The sun was coming through the blinds. The pancakes smelled like home. The cabin lights flickered a second time. This time it lasted longer. 2 seconds. 3. Long enough that a few passengers looked up. Long enough that a flight attendant in the galley stopped what she was doing and frowned at the panel above her head. Long enough that Margaret Holloway in seat 8B gripped her armrest a little tighter and told herself it was nothing. It was not nothing. In the cockpit, Captain Walter Hendricks, 58 years old, 26 years with the airline, was staring at a master caution light he had never seen before. Beside him, First Officer Marcus Reeves, 28 years old, 3 years out of the academy, was running through the checklist with hands that had just started to shake. Captain Hendricks reached for the radio. He took a breath, and then his world tilted sideways. It happened the way these things happen. No warning. The right side of his face went slack first. The corner of his mouth dropped. His right hand, which had been resting on the throttle, let go. He felt the strangest sensation of his vision narrowing into a long gray tunnel. He tried to say something to the first officer beside him. The words came out as a low, slurred sound that did not resemble English. Marcus Reeves turned his head and saw his captain slumping sideways against the harness. For 10 full seconds, the first officer of Atlantic Air Flight 447 did not breathe. Then training kicked in, hard. He grabbed the controls. He stabilized the aircraft. He hit the call button for the senior flight attendant. He looked at the master caution panel and saw 3 new warning lights that had not been there 60 seconds ago. Hydraulic pressure system A, hydraulic pressure system B, auxiliary hydraulic pump, failing, failing, failing. Marcus Reeves was a smart young man. He had graduated near the top of his class. He had logged 1,100 hours in commercial cockpits. He had passed every simulator test his company had ever thrown at him. None of that had prepared him for this. He keyed the cabin intercom with hands that did not feel like his own hands. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is First Officer Reeves." His voice cracked on the last word. He swallowed and started again. "This is the cockpit. I need to know immediately. Are there any military pilots on board this aircraft? If so, please identify yourself to a flight attendant right now. I repeat, are there any military pilots on board? In seat 8, Daniel Whitaker's eyes opened. The dream evaporated. The kitchen, the blueberries, the sound of his daughter's laugh, all of it gone in the space of a single breath. He did not move. He did not sit up. He did not turn his head. To anyone watching, he was a man who had simply opened his eyes. But his chest had gone tight in a way no civilian chest goes tight, and his hands resting in his lap had curled into fists so slowly and so completely that the knuckles had gone white. He knew that voice, not the voice itself. He had never heard First Officer Marcus Reeves before in his life. He knew the kind of voice it was. The voice of a young man trying very hard not to sound like he was breaking. The voice of someone who had just realized he was alone in a cockpit with a problem too big for him. Daniel had used that voice once over the Persian Gulf in 2014 when his wingman's plane had gone down, and he had been the one who had to call it in. Around him, the cabin began to wake up. Heads turned. People looked at each other. A woman 2 rows back asked her husband what was happening. A baby started crying somewhere behind him. Margaret Holloway sat bolt upright in 8B and stared at the back of the seat in front of her with the kind of frozen alertness people use when they are trying very hard not to panic. A flight attendant came down the aisle fast. She was young, maybe 26. Her smile was gone. Her eyes were moving over faces, scanning, searching, looking for the kind of person you cannot describe in words, but you know and you see. Someone with shoulders that did not slump. Someone whose hands were steady. Someone who looked like they had been somewhere harder than a coach seat on a Tuesday morning. Her eyes passed over Daniel Whitaker without pausing. She kept walking. Daniel let out a breath he had not realized he was holding. Good, he thought. This is not your problem. You promised her. You promised her. In his pocket, his phone was dark. In a kitchen in Portland, his sister was asleep on the couch. In a small bedroom with a galaxy painted on the ceiling, a 9-year-old girl was dreaming about pancakes and a list of 17 toppings, holding her stuffed rabbit by one ear, completely unaware that her father was 37,000 feet over the North Atlantic, sitting in a seat he had chosen because he wanted to be left alone, and the world had just asked him to stand up. She does not know, he told himself. She will never have to know. Someone else will stand up. There is always someone else. He closed his eyes. He tried to find the kitchen again. The blueberries, the sun, it was gone. In its place was an old voice he had not let himself hear in 5 years. The voice of his old commanding officer, Major Gregory, dead now from cancer, who had taught him to fly fighters and who had told him once after a mission that had not gone the way they wanted, that the difference between a pilot and a man who happens to know how to fly is what he does when nobody is making him do it. Daniel pressed his fingers into his palms. 3 rows back behind his right shoulder, he heard a chair creak. A man was standing up. Daniel did not turn around. He did not need to. He could feel the man's eyes on the back of his head, the way a hunted animal feels the eyes of the predator. A heavy, steady gaze, the kind of gaze that took its time, the kind of gaze that did not blink. Footsteps in the aisle, slow, deliberate. The footsteps of a man who had walked into rooms full of trouble before and had never once walked out of one in a hurry. The footsteps stopped beside row 8. Daniel kept his eyes closed. "Son." The voice was low, gravel and steel, and the kind of authority that came from having earned it the hard way. Daniel knew that voice too, not the man, but the kind. The voice of someone who had given orders in places where giving the wrong order got men killed. "Open your eyes, son. We both know you're awake." Daniel opened his eyes. The man standing in the aisle was in his late 60s, silver crew cut cropped close to a scalp that looked weathered and hard, a jaw that had been broken once and set wrong, pale blue eyes that had seen too much and had stopped pretending otherwise. He wore a plain gray sweatshirt and dark jeans and a digital watch on a worn nylon band, and he stood with his shoulders squared and his feet planted. And Daniel knew, without being told, that the man had stood in front of a flag for 30 years. "Frank Donovan," the man said quietly, "Sergeant Major, United States Army, retired, 75th Ranger Regiment, and you, son, are a pilot." Daniel did not answer. Margaret Holloway in 8B had gone very still. Her face had drained of color. She was looking at Daniel now, the way a person looks at a stranger they realize they have misjudged. Her eyes flicked from his face to his tattoos, to his hands, and back to his face. And there was something in them that Daniel had never seen aimed at him before. It looked like hope. "I don't fly," Daniel said quietly. "Not anymore. That's not what I asked you. I gave it up. 5 years ago. I'm out." Frank Donovan looked at him for a long moment. The plane hummed. A baby cried softly somewhere in the back. A woman across the aisle was praying under her breath in Spanish. Son Donovan said, "I have been on a lot of airplanes in my life. I have flown into places nobody is supposed to fly into, and I have flown out of a few places nobody was supposed to fly out of, and I have learned in all those years to recognize a certain kind of man." He leaned down, just slightly, just enough that his pale blue eyes locked onto Daniel's and would not let go. When that boy in the cockpit asked his question, I watched this whole cabin. Most of these people, they didn't even understand what he was really saying. They heard the words, and they didn't hear the meaning. But you, son, you heard it. I watched your shoulders. I watched your hands. I watched the breath leave your body the second he stopped talking. Donovan's voice dropped lower. That captain didn't ask for any pilots. He asked for military pilots. You know what that means. I know what that means. And whatever you used to fly, whatever uniform you used to wear, whatever promise you made to whoever you made it to, right now, there is a young man up in that cockpit who is 28 years old and is sitting next to his unconscious captain in an airplane that is braking, and he is asking for help. He paused. And you, son, are the only person on this airplane who can give it to him. Daniel stared at him. In his head, Lily was saying her line, the one from 5 years ago, the one she had whispered into his neck with her 4-year-old arms wrapped around him. No more flying, Daddy. No more danger. Just us. In his head, the kitchen was still there somewhere waiting. Saturday morning. Pancakes. 17 toppings. The good syrup. In his head, a voice he had not let himself hear in 5 years was saying something he did not want to hear. The difference between a pilot and a man who happens to know how to fly is what he does when nobody is making him do it. Margaret Holloway in seat 8B, the woman who had moved her purse to keep him out of her space, the woman who had decided who he was, The moment she saw his jacket, was watching him now, with tears in her eyes, and her hands clasped in her lap, and her lips were moving, and Daniel realized she was praying. She was praying for him to stand up. Frank Donovan straightened. He did not say another word. He did not have to. He just stood there in the aisle, an old soldier with a quiet face, and he waited. The cabin waited. 247 souls on board Atlantic Air, Flight 447 waited, most of them not knowing what they were waiting for, all of them feeling the wait anyway, the way a herd feels weather change before it arrives. Daniel Whitaker, 42 years old, father of a 9-year-old girl, with a list of 17 pancake toppings, member of the Iron Saints Motorcycle Club, former captain of the United States Air Force, looked up at the silver-haired stranger in the aisle. His hand moved slowly, almost without his permission, to the buckle of his seatbelt. The metallic click was the loudest sound in the cabin. Margaret Holloway covered her mouth with her hand. Daniel Whitaker stood up. The aisle of Atlantic Air Flight 447 was 28 inches wide. To Daniel Whitaker, it felt like the longest walk of his life. He stood in the narrow space and felt every eye in the cabin turn toward him. 247 faces. Some he registered. Most he did not. A young mother with a sleeping toddler against her shoulder, her chin resting on the child's hair, her free hand pressed against the window as though she were trying to feel something solid through the glass. A businessman with his phone clutched white-knuckled in his lap, the screen black, no signal. His thumb still hovering above it, like a man frozen in the middle of a sentence he could not finish. A teenage girl, too, rose up, her hand gripping her father's hand so tightly that the father's knuckles had gone the same color as the cabin walls. Daniel did not look at them. He looked at his feet, and at the carpet, and at the seat back ahead of him, with its little laminated safety card, and its plastic tray table, and its complete and total irrelevance to what was about to happen. Frank Donovan walked half a step behind him. The old ranger did not crowd him, did not push him. He simply walked the way an honor guard walks, and Daniel understood without being told that the man would have walked behind him all the way to the cockpit door if he had to. A flight attendant met them halfway up the aisle. She was the senior. Daniel could tell by the slightly different cut of her uniform and the gray at her temples. She was 45, maybe 50, and her face was the face of a woman who had not panicked in 20 years of doing this job and was not about to start now. Her name tag read Linda. Her eyes met his, and there was no surprise in them. There was no judgment either. There was only a clean, professional gratitude that almost broke him. "Sir," she said, "thank you. Please come with me." She did not ask his name. She did not ask his credentials. There would be time for paperwork if there was a later. Right now there was only the door at the front of the cabin and the cockpit on the other side of it, and the people in the seats behind her who did not know what was happening, but were beginning to suspect. Daniel followed her up the aisle. When he passed row 4, he did not see Margaret Holloway anymore. He did not see anyone. His vision had narrowed in a way he had forgotten it could narrow. The world had gone tunnel-shaped. Voices were muffled. Light was sharper. His breathing had slowed down. His hands had gone still in a way they had not been still in 5 years. It was the old place, the place he used to live in before a takeoff, the place fighter pilots went, so they would not have to think about whether they were going to come back. He did not want to be in that place again. He was in it anyway. Linda stopped at the cockpit door. She took out a key card. She paused just for a fraction of a second and looked at Daniel one more time. "Whatever's in there," she said quietly. "It's bad." "I know," Daniel said. She knocked. 3 short raps. A pause. 2 more. The lock clicked. The door opened from the inside just enough for Daniel to slip through, and then Linda pulled it closed behind him, and the sound of the cabin disappeared. The cockpit of a Boeing 767 is a small place, smaller than people imagine. 2 seats facing forward, a wall of glass, a console of switches and screens that goes from the floor to the ceiling and from the left bulkhead to the right. Daniel had never sat in one of these. He had ridden jump seat in a 737 once during a courtesy flight when he was still active duty. That was the only commercial cockpit he had ever seen. What he saw now was worse than he had let himself imagine. Captain Walter Hendricks was slumped in the left seat. His harness was holding him upright, but only just. The right side of his face had gone slack the way a curtain goes slack when you cut its cord. His mouth was pulled down on that side, frozen. His right arm hung against the armrest with the fingers curled into a soft, useless claw. His eyes were half open. His breathing was shallow. Every 6 or 7 breaths he made a small, wet sound in the back of his throat. Daniel had seen strokes before. He had seen one in his own father 12 years ago. He recognized this one immediately. The man was alive. He needed a hospital. He was not going to fly anything ever again. In the right seat, First Officer Marcus Reeves had both hands locked on the yoke so hard that Daniel could see the tendons standing up on the backs of his wrists. His hair was matted to his forehead. His uniform shirt was dark with sweat under the arms and across the chest. His face was the color of old paper. He turned his head when the door opened, and the look in his eyes was the look of a young man who had been holding the world up for 10 minutes and did not know how much longer he could hold it. "Please," Marcus said, "please tell me you're a pilot." "I was," Daniel said. "Air Force, F-16s, 1,200 hours, 5 years out." For one heartbeat, Marcus closed his eyes. He did not say thank God. He did not say anything. He just closed his eyes for one full heartbeat and then opened them again, and when he opened them, the panic had been pushed down a layer, replaced by something harder. "Captain Hendricks went down about 13 minutes ago," Marcus said. His voice was tight, but it was holding. He was running through the hydraulic checklist when he just stopped talking. I thought he was thinking. Then I looked over and he was already going. "Hydraulic checklist," Daniel said. "We lost System A about 20 minutes ago. No warning. Pressure just dropped. We isolated, ran the procedure, started cross-loading from System B. Then System B started dropping too." Daniel's eyes were already on the panel. He had never flown this aircraft, but he had spent most of his adult life looking at instrument panels, and the language was the same. Red lights, amber lights, numbers that should be high and were low. "Both systems," Daniel said. "Both systems. Auxiliary failing. We're in manual reversion, cables and trim only. The controls are barely answering. I'm flying with the engines as much as I'm flying with the yoke." Daniel exhaled through his nose. Slow. A wide-body jet in manual reversion was a wide-body jet that did not want to be flown. The hydraulic systems on a commercial wide-body powered everything that mattered: the flaps, the slats, the spoilers, the brakes, the landing gear. Without hydraulics, you had elevators that responded the way a barge responds to a paddle. You had ailerons that did almost nothing. You had a rudder that gave you a hint of authority and not much else. And you had no way to slow the airplane down once you got it on the ground, because the brakes were dead, and the spoilers were dead, and the thrust reversers, which were also hydraulic, were dead. You had, in other words, a flying brick. "What's our fuel state?" Daniel said. "We're heavy, 8 hours to Reykjavik with reserves. We can dump if we need to, but the dump valves are hydraulic." "I know." "Yeah." Daniel looked at the navigation display. The little airplane symbol was crawling across a digital ocean. There was a coastline ahead. He could see it on the screen. The southern tip of Iceland, 62 miles out. There was a green airfield symbol on the coast. Keflavik, Daniel said. Keflavik Air Base. Old NATO field. 10,000-foot runway. They've still got it staffed. I called them 4 minutes ago. They've declared an emergency on our behalf. They're rolling everything they have. Arrestor beds, engineered material at the south end of runway 20. They're configuring it now. Daniel nodded. His hands had stopped trembling. He had not noticed them trembling before, but he noticed now that they had stopped. "What's your name, son?" "Marcus. Marcus Reeves." "Daniel Whitaker. We're going to land this airplane, Marcus." "Okay. I need you to listen to me carefully. We don't have time for me to explain this twice. The way they trained you to land an airplane and the way I'm about to land an airplane are not the same thing. You with me?" "Yes. First, we need to move the captain. He's in the way, and if he comes to disoriented, he could grab something he shouldn't grab." They unbuckled Captain Hendricks together. The man was a deadweight, but he was a small deadweight, and they got him out of the seat and into the jump seat behind them and strapped him in tight. Hendricks's eyes fluttered once during the move, and Daniel heard him try to say a word that started with an S sound, but nothing came out of it. The man's right hand twitched against his thigh. "Hold on," Captain Daniel said quietly. "We're getting you down." He slid into the left seat. The yoke was wrong in his hands. It was too big. It was too far away from his chest. His arms were used to a fighter stick, a thing the size of a kitchen knife that responded to a 1/4 inch of pressure with a 100-degree roll. This yoke was the size of a steering wheel on a tractor, and when he moved it experimentally in his hands, he could feel the dead heaviness of an airplane that no longer had any power assist between him and its control surfaces. "How long since we lost the auxiliary pump?" he said. "It's been intermittent for 6 minutes. We have it now. We might lose it any second. Then we don't waste any seconds." Daniel keyed the radio. Keflavik Tower, Atlantic Air, 447, declaring Mayday. Captain incapacitated. Total hydraulic failure including auxiliary. Manual reversion. We'll have no flaps, no slats, no spoilers, no brakes, and no landing gear capability. We're coming in heavy, and we're coming in hot. We need the full runway and the arrestor bed. The voice that came back was Icelandic accented and impossibly calm. Atlantic Air 447. Keflavik copies your Mayday. Runway 20 is yours. Wind is 210 at 8 knots. Altimeter 299er2. Emergency services are mobilizing. Be advised the engineered arrestor system is being prepared. Are your pilots qualified for a no-gear, no-flap landing? Marcus glanced sideways at Daniel. Affirmative, Keflavik, Daniel said. Cleared straight in approach runway 20, Atlantic 447. He set the mic down. Marcus stared at him. I'm not qualified for a no-gear, no-flap landing, Marcus said. Nobody is qualified for that. The simulator doesn't even let you try. I know. Then why did you tell them? Because if I tell them the truth, they'll start arguing with me about whether we should ditch in the ocean. And we are not going to ditch in the ocean because the water is 42 degrees and we have 247 people on this airplane, and most of them will be dead inside 15 minutes if we put this thing in the water. Marcus swallowed. Yeah, he said. Okay. You ever flown a no-flap landing in the simulator once? As a check ride curveball? What was your touchdown speed? 195 knots. You're going to do 195 knots again today, except this time we're not putting the gear down, so you'll add maybe 10 more knots of float, and you'll have nothing to slow you down except friction and that arrestor bed. We're going to land at 200 knots on the belly. Yes, we are. That's what we are doing, Marcus. There is no other plan. Marcus stared at the panel. Then he nodded once very slowly, and Daniel saw the young man let go of something. Not his fear. Fear was useful. He let go of the idea that fear got a vote. Okay, Marcus said. Tell me what to do. Daniel breathed out. Here is how we are going to fly this airplane, he said. Without the hydraulic surfaces, the yoke is mostly suggestion. I will use what I can. The real flying is going to come from the engines. I need to turn right. I add power on the left pull, power on the right. I need to pitch up. I add power on both. I need to pitch down. I pull both. The airplane will respond about 2 seconds after the input, maybe more. We are going to be slow and ugly and constantly behind the airplane. Differential thrust, Marcus said. Yes, that's an F-16 trick. It is. It's not in any commercial procedure. It is now. You're on the throttles. I'm on the yoke. I call the power. You move the levers. You don't think, you don't second guess. You don't hesitate. You just do exactly what I say. We are one airplane and we are one pilot, and that pilot has 4 hands. Are we clear? We're clear. Good. Take us down. We're starting our descent now. Marcus moved the throttles. Daniel eased the yoke forward. The airplane responded the way Daniel had feared it would. Slow. Mushy. The nose dropped 2 degrees and then sat there as if it were thinking about whether to keep dropping. He fed in a little more pressure. The descent began. 800 feet per minute. 1,000. The altimeter started unwinding, and the navigation display showed Iceland coming closer, the way a wall comes closer when you are running at it. Behind them in the cabin, the world had started to change. Linda, the senior flight attendant, had taken the announcement system. Her voice came through the speakers smooth and steady, the voice of a woman who had practiced this exact announcement 1,000 times in training and never imagined she would actually have to give it. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Linda from your cabin crew. We are preparing for an emergency landing in Iceland. I need you to listen carefully. Please remove all sharp objects from your pockets. Glasses, pens, jewelry. Place them in the seat pocket in front of you. Identify the exit nearest to you. Count the rows. If the cabin fills with smoke, you will count those rows in the dark. When you hear the brace command, lean forward. Place your head against the seat in front of you. Cross your arms over your head. Hold that position until we tell you to move. We are going to land safely. Stay with me. In seat 8, B. Margaret Holloway was crying. She was not crying the loud way. She was crying the quiet way, the way people cry when they realize they are not in control of anything and they have spent 55 years pretending they were. Her hands were folded in her lap. She was looking at the empty seat, 8A, the seat where the man with the leather jacket had been, the man she had moved her purse to keep away from, the man who was now in the cockpit, flying her home. She had been wrong about a lot of things in her life. She had built an entire career on being right, right about deals, right about people, right about who was worth her time and who was not. She had judged the man in seat 8A in the time it took her to walk to her row, and she had been wrong about him in a way that made her stomach hurt. She closed her eyes. She did not pray, because she had not prayed in 30 years. But she thought very clearly the words, "Please bring him back." She did not know if she meant Daniel or her own husband dead now 11 years. Maybe it was the same thing. 3 rows back, Frank Donovan sat with his hands folded on his lap. His eyes were closed. His breathing was slow. He had been here before. Not this airplane, not this ocean, but the place underneath the place soldiers go when there is nothing left to do but wait. He thought about his son. He had not let himself think about his son in a long time. Tyler Donovan, 26 years old. 15. Eagle pilot killed in a training accident over the Nevada desert 8 years ago. A bird strike. Engine flameout. A young man who had ejected too low and had not survived the impact. A young man who had been the same age then as the first officer in the cockpit was right now. When the captain had called for military pilots, Frank Donovan had felt something happen in his chest that he had not felt in 8 years. He had looked across that cabin, and he had seen Daniel Whitaker freeze, and he had recognized the freeze because he had spent his whole career around men who froze when they remembered who they used to be. Frank Donovan had stood up because he could not bring his son back. But he could put another father back in a cockpit. He could give one more man the chance Tyler never got. In row 14, the businessman was typing on his phone again. There was no signal. There would never be a signal. He typed anyway. "Sarah," he typed. "I love you. Tell the boys I love them." There was a problem with the airplane. They said it was hydraulics. "There is a man flying us. I think he knows what he is doing. I am not afraid. I am thinking about you. I am thinking about the boys. I am thinking about the trip we never took to Yellowstone. I am sorry I worked so much. I love you." He hit send. The message did not send. It sat at the bottom of the screen with a little red exclamation point next to it. He did not delete it. He started a new message. He had been a good father mostly. He had been a good husband mostly. He had been a good man mostly. And mostly, he was understanding now, was not the same as enough. He had spent too many evenings at the office. He had missed his older boy's last football game of the season because of a meeting that turned out not to matter. He had told himself he would make it up to them. There would be time. There was always going to be time. He was 48 years old, and he was beginning to understand that there had only ever been now. He typed a second message to his older son. "Jake, I am so proud of you. I should have told you that more often. I should have told you yesterday. I am telling you now." He hit send. It did not send. He typed a third message. To his younger son. Caleb, you are the kindest person I have ever known. I do not know where you got it. It was not from me. Take care of your mother and your brother. He hit send. It did not send. He sat back. He let his head fall against the seat. He closed his eyes. He thought about Yellowstone. He thought about a trip he had been promising for 6 years and putting off because of work. He thought about his wife laughing on a back porch in summer. He thought about his boys when they had been small enough to ride on his shoulders. He thought about all the things he had assumed he would have time to fix. He realized with a clarity he had never had in his life that he was not afraid of dying. He was afraid of dying without his boys knowing what they meant to him. He opened his eyes. He started typing the message again. He typed it more slowly this time. He typed it like a man who understood that the words were the point even if they never arrived. 2 rows behind him, the teenage girl had stopped crying. She had reached a place beyond crying. She had her hand in her father's hand, and she was looking out the window at the gray water below them, and she was thinking about the things she had not done yet. The boy she liked. The driver's license test next month. The college applications she had been putting off. Her father said very quietly, "We are going to be okay, sweetheart. The pilot knows what he is doing." She believed him because at 16 years old, she was still young enough to believe her father about important things. Her father was 62. He had been a fireman for 34 years. He had run into burning buildings for a living. He knew in a way most people on this airplane did not know what fear smelled like and what it tasted like and how it sat in the chest. He could feel the airplane through the seat. He could feel the wrongness of it. He could feel the way the engines kept changing pitch in patterns that were not normal. He did not tell his daughter any of that. He squeezed her hand once, then again, then again. A slow, steady rhythm like a heartbeat, like a metronome, like a man passing his own calm into the body of his child by sheer force of will. He had done it when she was 3 years old and afraid of the dark. He had done it when she was 8 and her mother was in the hospital. He had done it last year when her grandfather died. He did it now. His daughter felt the rhythm of his hand, and she leaned her head against his shoulder, and she closed her eyes, and she let her father's pulse become her own. This, he thought, this is what fathers are for. In the cockpit, Daniel Whitaker was descending through 10,000 feet. The coastline of Iceland was visible now through the windscreen, a black line of volcanic rock rising out of a dark gray sea. The sky to the east was beginning to lighten with the first hints of pre-dawn. There were stars still visible to the north. The world was beautiful and terrible and entirely indifferent to whether anyone on this airplane lived or died. He had not flown a real aircraft in 5 years. He had flown the simulator at the community college twice with students just to show them what controlled flight felt like. He had flown the small 2-seater belonging to a friend in the Iron Saints once for 15 minutes. That was it. 5 years of dust on a skill that had taken him 15 years to build. The hands remembered. The hands always remembered. But the rest of him was running on something older than memory now, something deeper, the thing that lived in the body of a man who had once been a fighter pilot, the thing that did not care how long ago it was, the thing that was not asking permission to come back online. He was thinking in the strange, clear way men think when their lives have collapsed down to a single task about what his old commanding officer had said to him on the day he separated from the service. You are a pilot, son. That does not stop. That is who you are. You can put the uniform away. The uniform does not make you a pilot. You make you a pilot. He had not believed it at the time. He believed it now. 40 miles, Marcus said. Power up 2%, Daniel said. Up 2%. The airplane shifted almost imperceptibly. Daniel felt it through his hands and the seat of his pants the way a horseman feels a horse. The descent rate slowed. He fed in a left bank. The airplane took its time and then began slowly to come around onto the new heading. He counted in his head. 1, 2, 3. The bank settled in. He fed in opposite rudder. The airplane rolled out late clumsy, but it rolled out. He was talking to the airplane the way you talk to a deaf old dog. With patience, with repetition, with the understanding that it would do what you wanted eventually if you asked it the right way. 20 miles, Marcus said. The runway lights at Keflavik were visible now. A thin, bright ribbon of white against the volcanic black. It looked impossibly small. It looked impossibly far away. Daniel made himself stop looking at it. He looked at the instruments. The instruments were the only thing that mattered. His phone was buzzing in his pocket. He had felt it twice now. He ignored it both times. He knew who it was. His sister awake watching the morning news, having seen the headline that an Atlantic air flight had declared an emergency over the North Atlantic. Or maybe Lily had woken up early. Maybe Lily was holding the phone and asking her aunt to call Daddy. Maybe Lily was waiting on the other end of a call he could not answer. 10 miles, Marcus said. Power down 2%. Down 2%. The airplane began to settle. The descent rate climbed back up, 1,200 feet per minute. They were coming in hotter than they should be, but Daniel needed the speed. Without flaps, an airplane at low speed was not a glider. It was a stone. He needed the speed all the way down to the threshold and through it. 5 miles. The runway was no longer a thin ribbon. It was a road lined with lights growing in the windscreen second by second. Daniel could see the strobing red and blue of emergency vehicles staged on either side. He could see the white foam trucks. He could see the dark patch at the far end where the engineered material arrestor bed waited. He could see off to the right a fence, and beyond the fence a small road, and beyond the road a hangar, and beyond the hangar a single small house with a single light burning in a single window. Someone was awake in that house. Someone was watching this airplane come in. 3 miles. The yoke shuddered in his hands. The airplane was slipping. He fed in left rudder. The airplane straightened late. A warning chime sounded above his head. He did not look up. He did not need to. The auxiliary hydraulic pump had finally died. Whatever fragments of authority he had left in the control surfaces had just dropped by another 20%. The airplane was now flying on the residual pressure in the lines. That residual pressure was bleeding away by the second. He had maybe 90 seconds of usable controls left. He had 90 seconds to land an airplane. He fed in just a little more left rudder. The nose came around onto the center line, 2 degrees off, then 1, then on. He held it there with his feet. He held the wings level with his hands. He felt the airplane sinking, the descent rate creeping up no matter what he did. He fed in 2% more thrust on both engines. 2% up both, Marcus said. Up 2. The descent slowed. The airplane wobbled. He felt the right wing want to drop. He could not tell if it was a real input or his own tired arms. He fed in left aileron. The aileron did almost nothing. He compensated with thrust. Left engine up 1%. Right engine down 1%. The right wing came back up. He was talking to the airplane in tiny corrections now, whispering to it, asking it for one more minute, just one more minute. Marcus, when I call landing, you take the throttles to idle, on my command, not before, not after, the instant I say it, on your command. Got it. 2 miles. And after we touch down, you are going to cut both engines completely. No idle. Off. Fuel cut off. Both engines. We can't have a fire. Both engines off. Got it. 1 mile. The threshold lights were enormous now. A wall of brilliance rushing toward them. The runway numbers were the size of doors. The painted center line was a stripe of yellow that looked like it was 100 yards wide. Daniel pulled the yoke back. It fought him. The whole airplane fought him. The dead controls and the heavy nose and the absence of any of the tools he was supposed to have. He pulled harder. His arms shook. His shoulders burned. The descent rate slowed. The nose came up. 2 degrees, 3 degrees, 4. The airplane wanted to fall. He would not let it fall. In his head, Lily's voice was very small and very clear. Daddy. In his head, the kitchen was waiting. 500 feet, 300, 100. Landing, Daniel said. Marcus pulled the throttles to idle. The engine spooled down. The roar dropped. The airplane sank the last 50 feet through the cold morning air over Keflavik runway, 20 and at 198 knots, with no landing gear, no flaps, no spoilers, and no brakes. The belly of Atlantic air, Flight 447, met the asphalt. The world tore apart. The first sound was the scream of metal. It was not a sound the human ear was built to hear. It was the sound of 200 tons of aluminum dragged across asphalt at the speed of a freight train. It was a high, tearing shriek that had teeth in it, that rattled the bones of every person on board, that came up through the floor and through the seats and through the soles of the shoes and into the spine. It was the sound of an airplane being killed. Sparks erupted from beneath the fuselage in a fountain of orange and white. Daniel could not see the sparks from the cockpit, but he could feel them through the floor, as the friction of the belly grinding against the runway transmitted itself up through the airframe and into the soles of his boots and into his hands on the yoke. The yoke jumped. The whole airplane wanted to slew sideways. He could feel it. The right wing wanted to dip. The nose wanted to dig. If the nose dug, the airplane would cartwheel. 247 souls would die in less than 4 seconds. Daniel held the yoke with everything he had. His arms screamed. His shoulders screamed. His hands felt like they were holding back a moving wall. He kept the wings level. He kept the nose just barely off the ground. He talked to the airplane in his head the way he had once talked to his fighter when the engine was sick over the Persian Gulf. Stay with me. Stay with me. Stay with me. The airplane stayed with him. "Engines," Daniel said. "Engines off," Marcus said. Marcus's hands were already moving. Fuel cut off left. Fuel cut off right. The engines died. The roar that had been the soundtrack of the entire flight cut out and was replaced by a quieter, more terrible sound. The sound of an airplane sliding to its death on its own momentum with nothing left to push it and nothing left to stop it. The fuselage skidded down the runway in a long, ragged line. Through the cracked windscreen, Daniel could see the centerline lights flicking past faster than any landing he had ever made and slower than any landing should ever feel. The world had become very small and very loud. He was not thinking anymore. He was reacting. The yoke tried to twist. He held it. The nose tried to drift right. He fed in left rudder, what was left of the rudder, and felt the airplane respond just enough. 2,000 feet down the runway, 3,000, 4. The arrestor bed was coming. Daniel saw it first as a discoloration on the runway ahead, a grayer gray. Then he saw the texture, the engineered material designed to crush under the weight of an aircraft, designed to convert speed into the pulverization of millions of tiny ceramic blocks. The airplane hit it at 140 knots. The deceleration was unlike anything Daniel had ever felt in any cockpit. It was the inside of a car crash stretched out over 6 full seconds. The harness bit into his shoulders. His head snapped forward. His vision grayed at the edges. The airplane plowed into the arrestor bed, and the engineered material exploded upward in a massive plume of gray dust that buried the windows and turned the cockpit into a moving cloud. The windscreen cracked further. Spider webs of fracture lines bloomed across the glass. The airplane decelerated. 100 knots, 80, 60, 40. The world outside the windscreen was nothing now. Just dust, just gray, just the thunder of crushed material against the underside of the fuselage. 20 knots, 10. Stop. For 3 full seconds, there was nothing. No movement. No sound except the ticking of cooling metal somewhere beneath them, and a small electrical fizzing from a panel above Daniel's head. The airplane sat at the south end of Keflavik Air Base runway, 20 half buried in a cloud of pulverized ceramic, its belly torn open, its engines dead, its nose tilted slightly down into the soft material that had stopped it. It sat very still. Daniel could not move his hands. His fingers were locked on the yoke. The muscle memory had not yet released. He stared straight ahead through the cracked windscreen at a gray nothing, and the only thing he could hear was his own heartbeat. Then behind him, from somewhere in the cabin, he heard a sound. A woman's voice. A single shaky cry. The first human sound after the world ended. That broke the spell, Marcus Daniel said. His voice came out hoarse as if he had been screaming, although he had not made a sound the entire landing. "Get them out!" Marcus was already moving. He keyed the cabin intercom. His own voice was shaking, but it was working. "Cabin crew, evacuate! Evacuate! All exits! Go!" The slides deployed. Daniel could hear them. Whomp, whomp, whomp. Each one a soft explosion of compressed air. The cabin doors opened. Cold morning air came rushing in from the front of the aircraft. The smell of burning was outside, not inside. The dust began to settle. In the cabin, Linda, the senior flight attendant, was already on her feet. Her hair had come loose from its pin. There was a small cut above her eyebrow that she did not seem to know about. Her uniform was disheveled. Her voice was steady as iron. "Leave everything. Move to your nearest exit. Slide down feet first. Once you are on the ground, run. Don't look back. Run." She moved through the cabin like a general. She lifted a man who had hit his head and was bleeding from his temple. She handed a baby down a slide to the man waiting at the bottom, and then sent the baby's mother right after him. She physically pulled a teenager out of a window seat when the teenager could not make her hands let go of the armrest. She slapped a businessman on the shoulder and said, "Go, sir, go with the kind of authority that no one argued with." Frank Donovan was the last passenger off. He stood in the aisle while the rest of the cabin emptied. He helped an old woman out of her seat. He carried her bag down the slide for her, even though she had been told to leave everything. He helped a flight attendant whose ankle had twisted on the impact, and then he turned before he went down the slide himself, and he looked toward the cockpit door, and he nodded once. A nod for his son, a nod for the man who had stood up. Then he slid down the chute and disappeared into the gray morning. Daniel and Marcus came out last. They had to lift Captain Hendricks out of the jump seat together. The man was breathing. He was alive. They got him to the front cabin door where two paramedics were already climbing up the slide with a stretcher. Daniel watched the captain disappear into the hands of the men who would save his life. Then he and Marcus sat on the edge of the cabin floor and slid down together. Daniel's boots hit the gravel. The cold air hit him like a slap. He stood there for a long moment, looking up at what they had just walked away from. The fuselage of Atlantic Air Flight 447, half buried in the arrestor bed, its belly shredded into long, ragged ribbons of aluminum, its tail high and its nose low, looked like a wounded animal that had just stopped fighting. The engines were silent. There was no fire. There was just the morning light coming up over the Icelandic coast and turning the volcanic landscape pink and gold, and the dust still settling in slow, lazy curls on the cold air. 247 people stood in the gravel beyond the runway, wrapped in emergency blankets, clutching each other. 247. No one was missing. No one was dead. Daniel's knees gave out. He sat down on the gravel without meaning to. Marcus crouched beside him and put a hand on his shoulder, and did not say anything because there was nothing to say, and they sat there for a long time. Two men who had just done a thing that was not supposed to be possible while the sun came up over the world. Then a flight attendant brought him his phone. It had been on the cockpit floor. The screen was cracked. 3 missed calls from his sister, 11 text messages. He stared at the screen for a long time before he could make his fingers work the buttons. He pressed call back. His sister picked up on the first ring. "Danny." "I'm okay, Sarah." She made a sound he had never heard her make before, a sound like she had been holding her breath for an hour and finally let it out. "Danny. Oh my God. Danny, the news, they said. They said the plane. I'm okay. Everyone's okay. We're on the ground. Lily is right here, Danny. She wouldn't go back to bed. She's been awake since 5. She wants to talk to you." There was a rustling. There was the small, distant sound of a child being handed a phone in the early morning. There was a small, careful voice that wrecked him completely. "Daddy. Hey, sweetheart. Are you home?" "Not yet, baby. I'm in Iceland. But I'm okay." There was a long pause. Daniel could picture her exactly. Standing in the kitchen in her pajamas with the moon and stars on them, her hair sticking up the way it did first thing in the morning, the phone too big in her hand, her eyes very serious. "Daddy," she said. "Yes, baby. Did you fly the plane?" He closed his eyes. He sat in the gravel at Keflavik Air Base with the wreckage of an airliner behind him and the cold Icelandic wind in his face, and he held the phone to his ear, and he tried to figure out how to lie to a 9-year-old. He could not do it. "Yes, baby, I did." He waited for her to be sad. He waited for her to be angry. He waited for her to remind him about the promise. She did not. "Did you help people?" she asked. "Yes, baby." "How many?" "A lot." "How many?" "Daddy." He swallowed. 247, sweetheart. He heard her breathe. He heard her think about that number. He heard her somehow, even at 9 years old, understand it in a way most adults would not have understood. "Daddy," she said. "Yes, Lily. That's a lot of mommies and daddies." He could not speak. He sat in the gravel, and the tears finally came, and he held the phone with one hand, and he covered his face with the other, and his shoulders shook in a way they had not shaken in 20 years. "Daddy." "Yeah, baby." "Are you going to come home?" "Yes, baby. I'm going to come home." "Okay." She did not ask anything else. She did not ask why. She did not ask how. She did not ask whether he was going to fly again, or whether the promise was broken, or whether things were going to change. She just said okay, the way she had been saying okay since she was 4 years old, the small, clean okay of a child who trusted her father to figure it out. "Lily." "Yes, Daddy. Are we still having pancakes on Saturday?" There was a long pause. Then she said very carefully, "Daddy, I added 2 more toppings, so now it's 19. He laughed. He did not know he could still laugh. The laugh came up from somewhere underneath the tears, and he laughed with the phone pressed against his ear, sitting in the gravel with the wreckage behind him, and somewhere 1,000 miles away, his 9-year-old daughter was telling him about pancake toppings. 19 toppings, sweetheart. I'll bring extra blueberries." "Okay, Daddy. I love you, Lily. I love you too, Daddy. Come home soon." He hung up the phone. He sat in the gravel for a long time. When he finally stood up, his legs were unsteady. The cold Icelandic wind cut through his shirt. Someone had taken his leather jacket from the wreckage, and someone else had put a thermal blanket around his shoulders, and he did not remember when either of those things had happened. A woman walked toward him through the gravel. It took him a moment to recognize her. Her hair had come loose. Her sharp gray suit was streaked with dust. Her pearl earrings were gone, lost somewhere in the slide or the run from the airplane. Her eyes were red. She walked the way people walk when they have just remembered they have a body. Margaret Holloway stopped 3 feet away from him. She did not say anything for a long moment. She just looked at him. She looked at his face the way a person looks at a stranger they realize they have known their whole life. There was a tear running down her cheek that she did not seem to be aware of. "Sir," she said. Her voice was hoarse. "I was the woman in seat 8B. "I know," Daniel said. "I want to say something to you, and I do not know if I am going to say it well, but I am going to say it anyway." "Okay." She took a breath. She was a woman who had spent 30 years in boardrooms. She knew how to find words. She could not find them now. She tried again. "I judged you," she said. "I saw your jacket, and I saw your tattoos, and I saw the ring on your hand, and I made a decision about who you were before you ever sat down. I moved my purse. I moved my body away from yours. I sat next to you for an hour, and I never once looked at your face. Ma'am, please let me finish." "Yes, ma'am." "You saved my life," she said. "You saved every life on that airplane. And the woman I was when I sat down next to you, the woman who would have walked off this airplane in Reykjavik and never thought about you again, that woman is not getting on the next flight." She wiped at her face with the back of her wrist. "I do not know who I am going to be on the other side of today," she said, "but she is going to be different. And the reason she is going to be different, sir, is you." Daniel looked at her. "It's okay," he said. "It is not okay," she said. "But thank you for saying so anyway." She stepped forward. She put her hand on his arm. It was a small gesture, the kind of thing a stranger would not normally do. She looked at him one more time. Then she turned and she walked away. Her gray suit dusted with the powder of the arrestor bed, and Daniel watched her go. Frank Donovan came next. The old ranger walked across the gravel with the slight limp of an old soldier whose knees had stopped pretending. He had a thermal blanket around his shoulders. His silver crew cut was streaked with dust. He stopped in front of Daniel, and the two men looked at each other for a long moment. Donovan stuck out his hand. Daniel took it. The handshake was brief and hard and entirely unsentimental. "You did good, son," Donovan said. "Thank you for standing up, Sergeant Major." Donovan's mouth pulled at one corner, not quite a smile. "I have wanted to stand up for somebody for 8 years, he said. "What happened 8 years ago?" Donovan looked at him for a long moment. His pale blue eyes had something in them that Daniel had not seen up close before. Something old, something that had been carried for a long time. 8 years ago, Donovan said, I lost my son. He was a fighter pilot too. F-15s. He went down on a training run in Nevada. Bird strike. He ejected too low. He paused. He looked away out across the runway toward the rising sun. He did not blink. I have spent 8 years thinking about whether one thing being different would have brought him home. 1 second on the ejection seat, one bird flying 10 feet to the left, anything. I have lived inside that question for 8 years. He looked back at Daniel. When that captain made his call, son, I knew exactly what he was asking, and I watched this whole airplane, and I watched you, and I saw you decide not to stand up. And I have to tell you, son, in that moment, I was angrier than I have been in 8 years, because there was a young man in that cockpit who was the same age my boy was when he died, and I was not going to lose another one if I could help it. So I stood up because you wouldn't, because somebody had to make sure you did. He paused. My boy didn't get to come home, son, but you did, and the kid in the right seat did, and those people standing over there did. And maybe that is not a fair trade. Maybe that is not even close to a fair trade, but it is something. It is something I get to carry on the other side of today that I did not get to carry yesterday. So thank you, son. Thank you for letting me put a father back in a cockpit. Daniel could not speak. He nodded. That was all he could do. Frank Donovan squeezed his arm once. Then he walked away the same slow limp, and Daniel watched the old soldier go. and he understood finally why that man had stood up. Sometimes, the people who save your life are people you save back. The story broke worldwide before lunch. Atlantic Air's emergency landing in Iceland made every front page on every continent. The headlines were all variations of the same idea. Miracle in Iceland. Belly landing on ice. 247 saved. Some of the headlines mentioned the leather jacket. Most of them mentioned the tattoos. A British tabloid ran a photograph of Daniel sitting in the gravel with the Iron Saints patch on the back of his jacket, and the headline was the kind of headline he hated, the kind that turned a man into a costume. He did not read any of it. He stayed in Iceland for 2 days. He gave his statement to the investigators. He sat in a small, clean room and answered questions about the hydraulic systems and the differential thrust technique and the decision to land on the belly. The Icelandic investigators were polite and thorough. The Americans who flew in to join them were less polite and more thorough. By the end of the second day, he had told the story so many times that it had stopped feeling like something that had happened to him and had started feeling like a movie he had watched once. On the third day, they put him on a flight home. He did not sit in seat 8A. The airline had upgraded him to first class without asking. He sat in seat 2A by the window, and he watched the North Atlantic slide past beneath him in the long, pale daylight, and he thought about nothing in particular. When the plane landed at SeaTac, his sister was waiting at the terminal. So was Lily. She saw him before he saw her. She broke away from her aunt's hand, and she ran the way only a 9-year-old can run full speed. No caution, her sneakers slapping the floor, her hair flying, and Daniel dropped his bag and went down on one knee and caught her. She hit him with the force of a small linebacker. Her arms went around his neck. She squeezed so hard he heard her make a small grunting noise. "Daddy, you're really here. You're actually here. I'm here, baby. I'm here." She pulled back and put her small hands on his face and looked at him very seriously, the way she had done when she was 4 years old, and trying to remember if he was the same man from the photograph. "Did you get hurt?" "No, baby. I didn't get hurt." "Are you sure?" "I'm sure. Promise." He looked at her, his daughter, his 9-year-old, the reason he had walked away from the sky, and the reason he had walked back into it for 10 minutes, and the reason he had made it home anyway. He looked at her serious 9-year-old eyes, and he made the promise again the only way it had ever mattered. "I promise, Lily, I'm always going to come home." She nodded once, satisfied. "Okay," she said. "Then we're having pancakes." Sarah hugged him so hard she lifted off the ground. She did not say anything. She did not need to. They walked out of the terminal together, his sister on one side and his daughter holding his hand on the other, and the morning was cold and bright in Seattle, and Daniel Whitaker breathed in the smell of his own city and went home. 2 weeks later, the first letter came. It was on the kitchen counter when he came in from the garage. A plain white envelope, no return address, his name written in careful old man handwriting. He opened it standing at the counter while Lily was at school. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a photograph. The photograph showed a young man in an Air Force flight suit. He was 26 years old. He had pale blue eyes and a square jaw, and he was leaning against the side of an F-15 with his helmet under his arm and a grin on his face that was the grin of a man who knew exactly how lucky he was to be alive. The letter was short. "Mr. Whitaker, this is my son Tyler. He was killed in 2018. He was 26 years old. He flew F-15s. He was a good pilot and a better son, and the world was better because he was in it. I have spent 8 years being angry about the day my son did not come home. I have spent 8 years thinking that if just one thing had been different, if his ejection seat had fired 1 second earlier, if the bird had not hit the engine, if anyone had been there to do anything, my boy would still be alive. I want you to know that when you stood up on that airplane, you gave me something I have not had in 8 years. You let me believe that sometimes the right person is in the right seat. You let me believe that sometimes a father comes home. Thank you, son. Thank you for standing up. Frank Donovan. Daniel sat down at the kitchen counter. He held the letter for a long time. He thought about Tyler Donovan. He thought about all the other Tyler Donovans. He thought about the men he had known in his squadron, the ones who had not come back, the ones whose fathers had buried them. Then he folded the letter carefully, and he put it in a shoebox under his bed, and he started a new box, because he had a feeling there were going to be more letters. He was right. The letters came for months. From Margaret Holloway, who said she had been wrong about him in a way that would change how she walked through the world for the rest of her life. From the businessman in 14C, whose wife had gotten the message after he had landed and who had cried with him on the phone for an hour. From the teenage girl who said she was going to learn to fly. From the young mother with the toddler who said her son's first complete sentence had been, "The pilot saved us." From 100 strangers who had written him because they did not know what else to do with the gratitude they were carrying. He kept all of them. 6 months later, on a Saturday morning in the middle of October, Daniel took Lily to a small airfield outside Portland. It was a clear, cold morning. The kind of morning where the sky goes a particular blue that only October sky goes. They had eaten pancakes already. 19 toppings. The good syrup. They sat on the hood of his truck at the edge of the airfield, and they watched the small planes take off and land. Cessnas, Pipers, a couple of old tail-draggers. The kind of flying that had nothing to do with combat or commercial aviation. The kind of flying men did because they loved it. Lily leaned her head against his shoulder. She was 9 years old. She was tall for her age. Her hair smelled like the strawberry shampoo she had picked out at the drugstore last week. "Daddy," she said. "Yes, sweetheart. Do you miss it?" He did not answer right away. He watched a small white Cessna take off. The wheels left the runway. The nose came up. The airplane climbed into the long blue October sky and banked gently and headed off toward the mountains. "Sometimes," he said. "You could fly again," she said. He looked down at her. "What? You could fly again, if you wanted to. I wouldn't be mad." He stared at her. "Lily, I promised you. 5 years ago. I promised you I wouldn't fly. I promised you I would always come home." She tilted her head up at him, her serious 9-year-old eyes. "Daddy," she said, "you came home." He could not speak. "You came home from Iceland," she said, "even after you flew. So flying is not what makes you not come home, so you can fly, as long as you come home." She said it the way 9-year-olds say things, as if it were obvious, as if it had not been the thing he had been wrestling with for 6 months in the small hours of the night. He put his arm around her shoulders, and he pulled her in, and he kissed the top of her head, and he watched another airplane take off into the long blue sky. "You're pretty smart, you know that," he said. "Duh," she said. "I'm 9." He laughed. That was the year he started teaching ground school at the community college outside Portland. Basic aviation, aerodynamics, weather, navigation. He had thought he would hate the classroom. He did not. He liked watching the moment when a student understood lift for the first time. He liked the questions kids asked. He liked the way it felt to hand something over. That was also the year he started a small program with the Iron Saints, working with veterans coming out of the service. Pilots mostly, but other men too. Men and women who had been good at one thing for 15 years and did not know who they were on the other side of it. He told them they were not their old jobs. He told them they were also not just whatever was left after their old jobs. He told them they got to choose. He told them about the leather jacket and the F-16 and the pancakes and the promise, and he told them all of those things were the same person, and the trick was to stop fighting yourself. He did not fly commercially again. He did not want to. But on a clear Saturday in May, he took a single-engine Cessna up alone for the first time in 5 years. He flew it over the coast. He flew it low over the ocean. He flew it up through a gap in the clouds and into the long, clear, empty blue. And for the first time in 5 years, he was alone in the sky and not running from anything. He flew home in time for dinner. Lily was at the kitchen table doing her homework when he walked in. She looked up. She did not ask where he had been. She did not need to. She just smiled the small, private smile of a daughter who knew her father better than anyone, and she went back to her math problems. He hung his keys on the hook by the door. He kissed the top of her head. He started cooking dinner. The promise was kept. Not the promise he had made, the promise that had actually mattered. He came home. Years later, when Lily was in college studying aerospace engineering at a school out east, she would tell the story to her roommate one night, lying in the dark with the lights out. The story of a leather jacket and a hydraulic failure and a man who stood up. The story of 247 souls who got to keep their lives because somebody in seat 8A remembered who he was. Her roommate would say, "That is incredible. That is the most incredible story I have ever heard." Lily would say no. The most incredible story is that he came home. She would say it the way she had been saying it her whole life. The way only a daughter can. Years would pass. Daniel's hair would go gray at the temples and then keep going. The leather jacket would hang on the same hook by the same door. The Iron Saints patch would fade. He would teach 1,000 students at the community college, and 100 of them would become pilots, and 3 of them would tell him at their graduations that he had been the reason. He would never tell those 3 students about Iceland. He did not need to. They knew. Everyone who had paid attention knew. The story had become one of those quiet legends that aviation people tell each other in hangars and at air shows and over beers after a long day of flying. The biker who saved the airplane. The fighter pilot who came back. The father who broke his promise to keep it. Daniel did not love that the story was told. He did not hate it either. He had stopped fighting the story the way he had stopped fighting himself. The story was true. The story had happened. The story had given 247 people the rest of their lives. He could let it exist in the world without needing to control what it said. What he kept for himself were the things the story did not contain. the shoebox under his bed growing fuller every year, the Saturday morning pancakes which never stopped even when Lily was in college, even when she was an engineer, even when she had her own apartment and her own life and her own friends. She came home for Saturday morning pancakes whenever she could. He kept the good syrup on the counter. He kept the blueberries in the freezer. He kept the griddle ready, the flying. Every Saturday afternoon, weather permitting, he took up a small plane from the same airfield outside Portland. Sometimes he took a student. Sometimes he took an iron saint who had never been in a small plane before and wanted to know what the world looked like from up there. Sometimes he went alone. He came home before dinner, always. The iron saint's work, which had not stopped either. The phone calls in the middle of the night, the women with bruises, the children with nowhere to go, the ex-husbands who needed to be reminded that the world had teeth in it. He was older now. His knees hurt. His back hurt. He still showed up. He always would. And Lily. Always Lily. The center of the wheel. The reason for everything else. She graduated in the spring. She wore the cap and the gown, and she walked across the stage, and Daniel sat in the third row with Sarah and Big Tom from the Iron Saints. And when his daughter's name was called and she walked up to take her diploma, Daniel could not see her clearly because his eyes had gone hot, and he understood in a way he had not fully understood until that moment that the whole thing had been worth it. The whole thing. The cockpit and the pancakes and the leather jacket and the hydraulic failure and the promise and the breaking of the promise and the keeping of it. All of it. Because his daughter had walked across that stage. Because she was alive. Because she was beautiful and brilliant and brave and she was his. Because he had come home. Because he had always, always come home. That night, after the graduation dinner, after the cake and the photographs and the speeches, Daniel sat on the front porch of the small house outside Portland with his daughter beside him in a porch chair that had been on that porch for 10 years. The night was warm. The crickets were going. The stars were out the way Oregon stars come out, soft and many and patient. Lily had her degree in aerospace engineering rolled up in her hand. She was tapping it against her knee. She was 22 years old, and she was not 9 anymore, but she was still his girl, and she would always be his girl, and the part of her that was 9 would always be there somewhere underneath the woman she had become. "Dad," she said. "Yes, sweetheart. You know what I never asked you?" "What?" "Why you really stood up." Daniel looked at her. The porch light was off. The only light on her face was the soft yellow from the kitchen window behind them. She was not looking at him. She was looking out at the yard, at the trees, at the sky. "You know why," he said. "I know what you tell people. I know what you tell yourself. I want to know the real reason." He thought about it for a long time. He thought about Frank Donovan in the aisle. He thought about the young mother with the toddler. He thought about Marcus Reeves with his white knuckles on the yoke. He thought about Tyler Donovan, 26 years old, who had not come home. He thought about all of it. He turned it all over in his hands. Then he said very quietly the only true answer he had. "I stood up because I wanted you to be proud of me." Lily was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached over and she put her hand on top of his hand on the arm of the chair. "I am," she said. "I always was." He did not say anything else. He did not need to. The night was warm, the crickets were going, the stars were out, and in a small house outside Portland, a man who had once been a fighter pilot and a biker and a stranger in seat 8A and a father who had broken a promise to keep it sat on a porch with his daughter, and he was exactly where he had promised he would be. Home, always home. Word count approximately 18,400 words.